Coming up, the sweet, sweet taste of disastrous victory for the Brooklyn Nets. A road win against the Wizards. Timme time for Brooklyn. Oh, it's a good place to be for Brooklyn Nets fans. We dive in coming up
next. You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marnbeck. We thank you for making us your first listen today. We're 100% free on all those great platforms, and let you know today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, I'm buzzing. I've got an energy about me this morning that you would not believe, because the Brooklyn Nets 115-112 road victory over those Washington Wizards. Don't worry about those tankathon odds. Sure, we'll talk about that, but it was Drew Timme time. It's been Drew Timme time since he got that 2-year contract with your Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, look, this was going to be, wherever you stood in the tanking debate, this was a pretty important game because the Wizards haven't had a lot of incentive to win this season. The Nets have had, also not a lot of incentive to win this season, though they have 8 more wins now after this game. And this was probably like one of the last games in the schedule where you can make a pretty strong case where the other team had as much incentive to lose as the Nets did, which always makes for a tricky situation in terms of sort of only one team gets to lose. so
as they always say in sports, it's a classic.
Right. And so when you get into these situations, it gets a little tricky. Nets did hold out guys like D'Lo and Claxton, and Wizards were without Middleton. And so it was like no one was exactly putting their best foot forward, and it ends up being a close game. If you are if you're a tank odds maximalist, you don't love where this game landed in the win column. If you're a culture maximalist, where you want to just the team to go out and win at all costs, because that's just the nature of sports. I get both sides, by the way. And like this was a nice little win. So it's one of these things. These are the kind of games that divide a fan base. That's what ends up happening in the end.
Well, and that's why I think you put it there right, because hopefully, again, depending on where you consume your Nets content, if you're obviously the podcast first and foremost, go find us on all those platforms, subscribe, leave reviews. We get that. But if you're over on Twitter, then it's going to look one way. Sometimes when you're in the YouTube community, it looks another way. Sometimes when you just talk to your friends, when you're out around town, it feels a different way. The pro tanker reaction to this game is an absolute mess. And I don't mean that great, you're allowed to react that way, but this is what a disaster. The culture building segment is like, hey, some young guys. What about Drew Timme? We're going to talk about him coming up, right? Like this game could matter for players like that. In the end, the reason why I say that, I look at it and say it is what it is, and don't bother getting too high or too low about these games down in the season, is because, as you mentioned, the Nets held out certain players from this game. Like it just like the results are going to be the results, and you cannot control them. I know that we'll talk about who the Wizards did not have play in the fourth quarter, and you can look at the plus minuses and see some key contributors there. But could you account for the fact that Jalen Wilson, who's had a really bad run this season, has started to turn it around and knock down 4 or 7 from deep and gave you 20 points? No, you really can't account for that. I know Drew Timme has had some good games already in his short time being called up to Brooklyn, but his 19 points, like you had 39 points between those two players alone coming off the bench. It's going to happen, and you cannot. Trying to manipulate it, especially from a Brooklyn standpoint, I think is really hard to do. And if you think the Nets have not done a good enough job of shutting down key players, go back to the start of the season where all the pro tankers said this team is terrible, as we talked about. It's one of the worst rosters in the NBA. Well, then it shouldn't really matter what combination of players you put on the floor. The result should almost always be that you lose more often than not, unless you're playing a team like the Wizards and some of the worst in the league. So it is what it is, and I'm not going to lose too much sleep over slotting into the 37.2% for a top 4 pick and 9% for number 1 overall, as opposed to Philadelphia, who also played and lost last night and secured seemingly their 5th position in tank odds.
Yeah, look, it's a tricky spot. I agree with you. Like they didn't play their best players, and they're closing with Drew Timme, who's been in the G League all year. It's like it is kind of a like, what do you want to happen here, right? Like they're not just going to go out. The lineup. They're not just going to go out and sit on the ball. Like they're not going to sit on the ball for the last 5 seconds and just like and make sure no one can shoot, right? So it's like, I mean, clearly, no one's suggesting they should do those things, and I can understand. I think more of what the reaction you see is sort of like it's this aggregate reaction. I don't think anyone cares too much about like this one game. It's like, look, they're closing with Drew Timme and like Jalen Wilson. Like, What, you want Mr. Whammy to go out there and start chucking threes? Like who's
Right.
supposed to play? Like who's supposed to play? so these guys have been in the G League. Jalen Wilson's kind of been bad all season. So I'm 100% with you. I think it's more like an aggregate reaction of
Yes.
they should have downside protected a little more against some of this stuff. And
this win shouldn't matter. Getting this win here should be irrelevant because you already did most, like the Wizards, right? Arguably like the way the Wizards are now. Well, they're in the position where they're not going to fall out of having a chance like everybody else at the top there. Maybe they even sneak into the number 1 pick, right? Like that's where you want to be living here in the last handful of games, as opposed to trying to hang on to a position there in the middle of the.
It's just like one of these aggregate reactions to things. So I get it. And because the players are still going to play. Like these guys that they went out and shot 39% from 3. Like they were bombing, right?
Yeah.
Like Jalen Wilson just couldn't miss. Keon Johnson, who shot 30% all season from 3, was 5 for 7. Like,
right.
Okay. These things just happen.
Yeah, account for that.
It's also like, it's not like the Wizards are like this, throwing haymakers here. They're throwing out there like AJ Johnson starting, Champagnie starting, right? And so, and they're closing with guys, JT Thor, who's been all over the NBA, is playing 23 minutes. Like this is a team that also is incentivized to lose to. I think it's more like Nets fans. There's a segment of Nets fans, I think probably us, or I'll put me included, who went into this season being like, what you have to do at all costs is protect the value that you got back from those Rockets picks, right? Like this
100%.
incredible value. Getting the Rockets picks just gave you an absolute, the Rockets picks that were the Nets picks, this absolute get out of jail free card, a total get out of jail free card on the Harden trade. Like they got it. It was like unbelievable that they got it back. And to not capitalize full value, full percentage value on the picks is a tough place to be. And I think that like it just more speaks to the whole season because, well, go ahead because I have a couple numbers. I'll just put where the Nets are now. Like the numbers are pretty clear now of where they are. But go ahead and then I can kind of follow up.
No, and that's why I think you're right in terms of saying like in the aggregate, because coming into this, because I think where I mentally shifted, this first 19 games of the year, but where I mentally shifted was, well, here, this is the raw. Once you see what the roster is, right? Once you see they didn't get rid of Dorian Finney-Smith in the offseason, they didn't get rid of Cam Johnson in the offseason. They did, once that you saw they didn't make all of the choices ahead of this year to be as absolutely bad as possible. And then you see that Jordi Fernandez has some real weight in the locker room. He's going to have an impact. You go, okay, this season is going to be what it's going to be. So I probably moved off of well, you need to do it at all, at all costs. Yeah, you did need to, but this is always you did this the other day when we talked about trading for Zion Williamson or trading for Ball. And it was like, well, don't worry about my opinion. Let's use Sean Marks' opinion, right? The organization. Don't think about what I said they should have done coming into the year. What did they do coming into the year? That should tell you what the possibility is of them being in the position like a Utah or like a Washington relative to where they are and to what their agenda is. Could be wrong. We may say I would have done it differently, but it doesn't change the fact that that's going to impact how the season is going to unfold for them. Coming up here in just 1 second, Doug will give you those critical numbers about where they stand. And we'll continue to talk about this one, including Drew Timme, 2-year contract. Come on, Kelly Olynyk, little baby Kelly Olynyk out there on the floor. Better watch your back, boys. We'll talk about that here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you reference over at Game Time. Nothing like watching basketball live. You got the crowd, you get the sound of the sneakers on the hardwood. Maybe you even see a celebrity sighting courtside. I think that's get a little better. They'll have a few more of those. You want to catch a game in person. Game Time makes getting tickets even easier than ever. They got the Game Time picks. It's going to filter out the fluff, show you only the best deals on great seats. You're not going to waste time scrolling through thousands of tickets. If you head over to Game Time right now, I got a bunch of Nets tickets as we close out the season. Got T-Wolves at Nets starting at $30. Raptors at Nets starting at $23. Pelicans, it keeps going down here, by the way. Pelicans at Nets, $17. Knicks at Nets, oh my goodness. Oh, this one's more expensive. Starting at $134. But your friends across town might be bumping the price on that one up just a little bit. Just some of what you're going to get over at Game Time. It's very easy ticket shopping, and they have the super deals. Peace of mind. You get those seat views before you buy. No surprise fees, lowest price guaranteed. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time.
All right. As we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the 115-112 victory over the Wizards on Saturday night, effectively pushing the Nets down into the 6th position, probably permanently as we look forward to the end of the year. Toronto behind them, who have won 3 straight games of their own, 27-47. Philadelphia now ahead of them at 23-51. And before we do talk those numbers, I will just say that I like, and it's easy because when you look at Philadelphia, you see you lost 7 and they're doing it the right way, and the Nets have lost 8 out of their last 10, etc. There's still those nights when something random happens and then Philadelphia accidentally walks into a win. There was a stretch, if you were keeping an eye on their box score, where Philadelphia was at risk of potentially maybe winning a basketball game, and they didn't. So the funny things happen if you're of that ilk in the fan base. Who knows? Maybe Philly accidentally wins a game, and then all of a sudden you're tied again with the Nets. Unlikely, but it is possible. Let's talk numbers before we talk Drew Timme.
It looks like they're pretty much set in the 6th spot because I just don't see. It's just impossible to see how Philly wins with the way they've been playing recently. Like, they have taken more of the approach of like, let's just kind of sit on our hands here. And it's not like they were just like kind of world beaters anyway. So I don't know. It feels impossible to think about the Philly winning. So I think they're pretty much set here. The Nets have essentially 9% across the board for picks 1 through 4. It varies a little bit on the decimal points, but it's not worth getting into. So about a 9% chance of each of the 1 through 4 picks. But where they're really, where the heavy odds now for them are, they're slated to pick about a 30% chance of picking 7th. But really, if you just aggregate it, it's a 63% chance of picking 6th through 10th right now. So 63% chance of 6. So that's really where Nets fans should probably, from the numbers, start leaning their thought process into the 6 through 10 range, right? Really focused on the 7th. Excuse me.
No,
the
I go more positive. 7 through 8. 7 through 8. That's where they're
okay. 7th and 8th pick. It's basically a 50% chance, like 50% chance of 7 through 8. Or 7 and 8. So that's probably the part of the draft board to start looking into around, who you want to be or who you want to think about. People had said this is like a very top heavy draft with a top 3. Maybe you want to extend it to 5. It starts getting a little muddier right around this range in classic Nets fashion. So look, the ping pong balls still have to fall where they are. And, who knows what's going to happen. It's a lottery after all, as I've been reminded many times this year. But that is where, at least from the percentages right now, that it's most likely to land. And that's just, that makes sense with where they are overall in the standings.
And you know what's so funny about that too, before we talk about Drew Timme here, is that so you go over just we'll use Tankathon for right now. You can get any other outlet that you want. But so when you go and you look at it, remember Trey Johnson was getting posted closer to 5 than he was to say 8. Right now, he's now considered to be 7th. He's slated to go to the Toronto Raptors at the 6th position right now. If the Nets were able to get that, which by percentages they'll probably be lower. Now all of a sudden it's Malik, the center from Duke, and he was listed kind of outside the top 10 maybe a month ago. So that's the funny part I find about this is, and I'm not knocking any fan base, but a player that you would have been like, oh, I wouldn't want that guy. Now all of a sudden is the guy you're like, I can't believe we're going to miss out on him because he's going to go a little bit higher now versus maybe a Trey Johnson. You go, oh, that's the guy that we'd love to get your hands on at the 4th or 5th pick. Now all of a sudden he may fall into your lap at 7 or 8. And you go, oh yeah, well, you missed out. So that's the way that it works, right? The timing of these things is critical. And with the NCAA tournament going on as well, that has had obviously a big impact too. But I think you're right. The top heavy draft, those top 3 picks, okay, fine. But the fact that we've seen player movement in VJ Edgecombe was not listed. He's now considered maybe, 4th, 5th. What's that going to look like? The 4 through probably all the way down. I'll put right now when they do the projected with Jeremiah Fears going 11th to Miami. So you're talking about 4 from 11 are all names that we've heard about, that have been talked about a lot in and around that lottery space, that have real value. And then I think if you ask any different fan base, would slot them in 30 different orders, right? So this isn't a silver lining thing. It's just the group that the Nets are in, it probably is okay, as we talked about previously, for them to be best player available. Who do we think is the best player available? That's the guy we take, because all of these guys are falling into that same kind of group after you get away from those top 3 players that we don't think the Nets are going to have a chance to get.
Yeah, we've said this a bunch of times that we think that this is where the draft board's going to, I think we said this last 4 podcasts, this is where the draft board is going to just be dealer's choice, I think,
yeah.
Right? I think it's just going to be where people, and I think this will change by, after workouts and after some of the other stuff kind of shakes out, and you're going to see maybe as people get more into the draft process, I think you'll see this range really start shifting around, and teams are going to play really coy, I think, with who they want, because I think they're going to really internally evaluate these guys a lot differently. And so I think this is going to be a really, really hard range to pick, which will make it fun. I mean, the draft will be fun. The Nets are going to take, no matter what's going to happen, no matter where the land, and we can talk with Timme here in a second, but well, no matter where the ping pong balls land here, this draft will be fun from a Nets perspective, because they have a lot of picks in the first round. There's going to be a lot of guys we can evaluate. There's going to be a lot of what ifs. Draft night's going to be pretty stoked here, because it's going to shift. We're going to have to look at basically every single player to know. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and in a situation where Nets fans just simply haven't had. I mean, the Clowney Derek Weir, they had 2 picks, but we kind of knew in the range. We were, we kind of did evaluations on everyone from like 15 to 25. But this year it's like outside of Cooper Flag, probably outside of the top. Well, I mean, who knows where they draft, but like, let's say it's
by the way, like, just real quick, like this is the other thing. We said this all along. I think Doug has done an excellent job of breaking down the percentages, and why we always say, like, well, you'd rather have the highest percentage chance to win $1 million than you would to have a lesser. Totally get that. And also, I had the dumbest possible analogy that I could think of there's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich sitting there for you. This is just saying that, like, you're getting a slightly smaller piece potentially of that sandwich when you talk about the draft odds. The sandwich isn't being taken away from you. You just have a less percentage chance to get the tastiest bite. Like, that's what is going on right now for the Nets. So when we talk about they're going to slot into 6th, and this is what the numbers look like, that's 100% true, and that's real. Also, they're still going to have a 37% chance to be into that top 4 spot. So there is a world where on draft night we go, oh my goodness, they're picking 3rd. I'm not even gonna do the Cooper Flag dreams. Just they're picking 3rd. So they're gonna get Ace Bailey, or they're going to, or they're gonna get Harper. Like, maybe that does end up happening. So it's a wide range of outcomes, just to your point, where, like, and because of the deep draft class, you don't get to say, well, these handful of guys towards the back end aren't really as important or don't matter as much. It's like, no, everybody in the first round, and even a couple of guys in the second round, with where the Nets are picking at the back end of the first, are going to be names you have to look at and think about how will the Nets be evaluating it as they work through draft night.
You want to hear? Oh, dude, I just thought of the best scenario ever, and then we can talk. That I promise we'll talk a little Drew Timme in the rest of this game. Here's the scenario that will make everyone's head explode. Nets get the 3rd pick, right? Yeah. Okay, so they somehow get the 3rd pick. Flag 1, Dylan Harper 2, and then they're like Trey Johnson.
You know what's so good? I was about to say, like, no matter where they might pick, say they pick 7th even. I was like, who's the guy, even at 7, where you go, of course, the Brooklyn Nets, like, went off board, right? They go with, like,
I'm just saying they go off board and not go Ace Bailey. Like, they don't go Ace Bailey. They just go off board and they said, no, we did our own thing. It's this guy. That would be the coup de grace, the death blow. The death blow would be where it's like a 3-person draft, and Sean Marks just is like, let me cook, and just goes and just takes a totally different guy. I don't think it's like likely, but that would be the most hilarious situation. I haven't thought about that one yet, but now I got that one in my stable of what ifs.
Oh yeah, it's a beautiful landscape for the Brooklyn Nets fan base at this point. Coming up here in a second, Drew Timme. You would think by this point of the podcast episode, with the number of times we said his name, we would have told you a lot about him. And now we're going to tell you a lot about him, as he got the 2-year contract. Everyone throwing those shades of Joe Harris, white guy with a beard and a headband. You know, Brooklyn always needs one. And we'll talk about him to close things out in just one moment. All right, so as we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, in the 115-112 victory, there was a lovely little performance by Drew Timme, who effectively had the game-winning bucket. Jalen Wilson ends up hitting 2 foul shots at the end, but it is the basket interference on Drew Timme's shot that seals the deal. He got called up. He has the 2-year deal now for himself for the Brooklyn Nets, which actually, in a lot of ways, makes it, I wish I had said it sooner, because it makes a ton of sense based on where the Nets timeline is going forward. It's not because Drew Timme is going to become some otherworldly athlete, whatever, but they're going to need a couple other bodies. So why not reward a guy that's had massive performances at the G League level? He gives you 25 minutes on Friday against the Clippers, 4 of 6, knocks down 1 of 3, does some things, gives you 11 points and assist. This game, however, he had 10 rebounds on Friday as well. 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 19 points, 9 of 14 from the field. And I mentioned with Doug before we started, I was watching some of the highlights afterwards again to look back at some of his shot selection, we'll call it. The Wizards announcers had him as, shades of a familiar face for Wizards fans, Kelly Olynyk. And I thought, yeah, that's like about the right pace of play and style that he's bringing to the floor. I wish that things were different right now from a tank standpoint, because I would love it if the fan base could be excited for Drew Timme at the end of the year, but it's getting overshadowed by what's happening.
I think people are excited. I think it's
Yes,
been. I've seen a
yeah.
lot of.
Always do the stupid Twitter filter is always the worst way to like frame some of these things. I think the fan base in general is celebrating Drew Timme as he got in a call up.
I think so. It's been a nice story. I mean, he's gotten a lot of minutes over the last couple games. They sat out the bigs, so like it makes sense that he would get more minutes. I mean, he's closing the games. Like they ran a pick and roll dive for him to the basket for their final shot. Like I don't know, like if you want a vote of confidence, I don't know if that was like exactly how it was after ATO drawn up, but it sure seemed like it. Like he sets the screen, Tyrese Martin comes off of it, and then he dives to the basket. And a nice job by Martin to find them before essentially the goaltending goes in. It's counted on the goaltending. It's a really nice story. I mean, this game is 3/4 of a G League game, so it's like a little hard to sometimes evaluate sort of like what the top end talent looks like. He's clearly doesn't jump off the screen, but he's a big screen setter. He definitely has, like, he's older, like he's like 24, 25 years old. So he's been sort of around the block. The Jalen Wilson the Jalen Wilson story, because I think they've known each other since like 4th grade or something like that. And like that they've known each other forever is a cool thing that they're playing together. I mean, there's a lot of like cool storylines going on with this. I mean, he's going to be around here. He's kind of like the guy that you don't mind having around on even like this kind of team, because it's not going to jump off the page, but it's selfless. The screen setting does help, especially with guards that aren't like incredible on ball. Like that is, and it's funny because like the screen setting is exactly sort of what set up that final play. And so it's a nice story. I don't think there's like any like superstar stuff here, but from a crush, actually, he's a good example of what we talked about recently, where it's like if you want to be able to even a little hang at the NBA, you have to completely smoke the G League. And he was doing that. Right. Like he was I'm pretty sure the G League numbers were, I'll look them up real quick, but I'm pretty sure they were like off the page. And so I think it's an example of that. And I like the story. I don't know. I'm not like going crazy about it, except for like sort of tongue in cheek on, like what to expect. Gave 24 points on 16 field goal attempts per game in the G League with 10 rebounds. Right. So he was like dominating.
He had a performance before he got the call up and got the contract. Like he was, he's cooking the G League, like you said, like we
39% from 3, right? Like he's just like, it's kind of all it's all together. Like these are the numbers you need to see at the G League. This is what we talk about with Dariq Whitehead. It's like which he wasn't doing, by the way. It's like these are the numbers you need to see at the G League to be able to squint and see NBA production at all. Yeah. And it's like, okay, bigger, sort of slower guy, a 20 and 10 with efficiency from outside. Okay, now you can like come on up.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what you need to see, though. If it's not that, you have to have real questions. But he's been doing it. He's been able to hang. I think like he's like a nice role player to have on a team that's gonna have young guys again. Because he's a rookie, kinda, but he's like old. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's not exactly like sort of like 18-year-old rookie style here either.
No, and that's what I was saying. That's what I said before about this. Is like it shouldn't be surprising that he's a guy the Nets are like, we'll give you a 2-year contract, because next year you're still going to need bodies, and this summer things are going to look different. Some guys are going to get brought back. Some guys aren't going to get new contracts. You're going to bring in all these rookies. So you mentioned the 20 and 10. It's like, hey, guess what? You know what you don't need to be super fast about? Being on the defensive boards and grabbing a rebound, right, on missed shots. You can do that. You know what you don't need to be super fast about, as long as you are positionally sound, setting some screens on the offensive end. So he can do some of those things. He has a little bit of court vision out of a 5 kind of spot when you want to see someone that can move the ball around the court for you. Great. And like I said, we're not going to turn around next year and be like, I can't believe that Drew Timme is a double-double machine at the NBA level. But you need bodies like this, as we've talked about. If you're going to have a rebuild that's going to obviously extend into next season, you can't look at this roster right now and think every single player is going to be back here. Every single player is going to have the same type of role. And frankly, they've always needed size. Like, you've always needed some physicality and size on your roster. This is another opportunity to have one of those players. So really happy for him. Beyond that, I mean, listen, there's nothing else to take away from this game. Clearly, there is, for the Brooklyn Nets, as you mentioned, I wanted to, we talk about like Philadelphia being able to lose games because their next schedule coming up is pretty difficult for them. They've got the Bucks and the Knicks are in there. I think the Kings are maybe on their schedule as well. But from a Nets standpoint, their upcoming schedule we said this the other day, tongue in cheek. I said, "Oh, well, if they finish with 25 wins, well, they probably will finish with. They're probably going to win another game in here somewhere, and it's not going to be detrimental anymore at this point." But they have Dallas coming up on Monday, and then they don't play again until Thursday against Minnesota, Toronto, and the Pelicans, rounding out the back end with Atlanta of their 4-game homestand there. So, like, there's losses on the board, but there's also probably a couple of wins there too. So we may end up at the end of the season talking about a 27-win Brooklyn Nets team just because of the way the end of the season unfolds and the way their schedule looks.
You know, yeah, I think that I think they're pretty much probably locked into this spot would be my guess.
That's what I mean. So you can go out and go for it. Like go for the wins now. It really doesn't. It's not going to matter probably to moving out of your percentages.
I do wonder if we'll see Cam Johnson shut down now because he got hurt in this game, and I wonder if like they'll just say, "Hey, don't even worry about it. Like we're just like don't come back."
Clowney came down on an ankle too.
Yeah, so I wonder if we see a couple of these guys get shut down. One other before we get out of here, one interesting subplot. It's not going to happen. It's gonna be so close though. Is that the Bucks are like in a total nosedive? Like Lillard's basically out. Giannis has been hurt. The team stinks. Kuzma's like exactly what you would have expected when, you know, with the worst net rating guy in the league, and then they trade for him. It's like shocker, still the worst net rating guy in the whole league.
Yeah.
And they're just gonna miss the play-in. I think they have like too many wins for this because this would have been very interesting because the Nets have the Bucks pick, and right now they have 33 losses and the Magic have 39. So I don't think they can get all the way there. There's 9 games left. They'll basically lose every game from here on out. So I don't think that's going to be it. But it's going to be funny because I think the Bucks thing is going to end up being very close to the plan where it's like, oh, they could have landed in the lottery.
Yeah.
Right? It would have been like terrible odds, and it would have been mostly just like the 12th or 13th pick or whatever. But it would have been nice.
That would have felt right? Like if the Nets, maybe they made some whatever, but they played for culture, etc., and they ended up being 5th or 6th, whatever it is. And then but the Bucks one gravitated out of the 20s and ended up landing 13th. You'd be like, okay, you'd sign up for 2 top 13 picks for the Brooklyn Nets, at the beginning of it, probably, if you knew that it meant getting a couple of good players. That would be, I'd love to see a total nosedive here, if at all possible.
I just think it's going to be like one loss. It's going to be I think this will be classic Nets too, where it's like it's like one loss away or something like that.
Well, by the way, wouldn't you love to have the Bucks on the schedule for the Brooklyn Nets now down in the stretch of the season? Like that'd be the dream. If the Bucks showed up on the Nets one more time to be like, and this win, you can actually force the Bucks into the play-in tournament. It doesn't.
Yeah, there's like a little juice there with like the Giannis stuff with the Nets and like a couple of these games in the past. Anyway, so I thought that was an interesting subplot just to keep on. If you want to really root for hardcore for losses, that's the team. But again, the Magic would have to really go absolutely nuts. I think it would be basically need to be like I could do the numbers here. It'd be like a 1-9, 9-1 situation to like secure it or something like that. 2-8 for the Bucks and 8-2 for the Magic. I think gets it done, but it's like I think only that scenario. Anyway, so fun stuff. Always rooting for standing watches as we roll through the rest of the season. Okay, so we'll have some more stuff as they close out the rest of the year. I think we're pretty much, like I said, locked into this spot. Oh, go ahead, and then we can close out.
No, and like this week we'll probably start to talk a little bit about like where they are going to slot and start to lay out some of the landscape of positions, because as I mentioned, they'll play Monday night and then they won't play again until Thursday. So there's starting to be some gaps here, along with who gets shut down and really thinking about the off season effectively.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube. Subscribe to wherever you listen. It's a podcast as well. Totally free for you. Number one way to help your boys. Subscribe over on YouTube or Spotify or iTunes or wherever, or all three.
Oh, yeah, all of them. That's what we always recommend. Drew Timme's motto when he's on the court: slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that's your boy, Phil Dunphy.
Phil, is that from Modern Family? Is that who that is?
Greatest dad in America.
Yeah. But that's a quote that's like a Navy SEAL quote, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball. Yeah.